Yesterday, TMZ said, no arrests imminent. 24 hours later, the same TMZ said the opposite. David may officially be a suspect. Then ABC, NBC, Law and Crime, each with a different version of the same case. The community sarcastically said, "BRA ki naudidas water is wet." LAP finally notices the obvious. And amid all the chaos, there was only one truth that made the internet boil if everyone saw the problem. Why did it take LAP 2 months to use the word suspect? This was no longer a missing person case. No longer a body Celeste in a car. No longer an entertainment story. This was a question that touched the hearts of millions. How did a 14-year-old die? And who will be held responsible? Clear case. Over the last 48 hours, the public has witnessed one of the most chaotic media flip-flops since the Celeste Rivas case began. Within a single day, major outlets contradicted themselves in real time. TMZ, long regarded as one of the fastest and most inside the LAPU sources, announced yesterday with absolute confidence, no arrest is imminent. A clear message, one that practically shut down public expectations. But exactly 24 hours later, that same TMZ released a headline that said the exact opposite. David may have officially become a suspect in the case. No explanation, no correction, just a sudden pivot strong enough to blow up the internet. Meanwhile, Law and Crime, a network many consider neutral and legally precise, delivered the opposite assessment. LAPD is not close to making an arrest. Some of their legal analysts even emphasized that police could be months away from any formal action. NBC, ABC, Fox LA all published different versions of what's happening. One outlet claims this is now being treated as a homicide. Another insists no one has been labeled a person of interest, and others cite unnamed sources pointing in completely different directions. The result? No one knows what's fact, what's speculation, or which inside source was exaggerated for clicks. Even the online community is fed up. Sarcastic comments flooded every platform. "BRA ki naudidas water is wet." And LAPD finally figured out what the entire internet saw 2 months ago. Amid all this chaos, only one thing has become painfully clear. The public has lost trust in the information ecosystem, and they want answers now. The Celeste Rivas case is no longer just a personal tragedy. It has become a test of public trust, trust in the legal system, in the media, and in the very institutions that appear on television every day promising to protect children. And to understand why this case has pushed the internet into a 2-month uproar, we must confront 3 core questions. 3 questions that, so far, not a single news outlet has answered consistently. First, why has this case moved so slowly? Celeste was found on September 8th. The Tesla she was discovered in was towed into a small Hollywood impound lot, and from that moment, the investigation seemed to enter a 60-day blackout. No preliminary findings, no press conferences, no person of interest, no suspect. Meanwhile, the online community produced hundreds of analyses, thousands of data points, and millions of questions, yet LAPD continued to repeat the same phrase: ongoing investigation. This case is not like a typical missing person report. The remains was severely decomposed. Some parts were described as severely deteriorated. That alone forces the investigation into the realm of forensic science, slow, methodical, and vulnerable to delays involving toxicology, DNA, and forensic pathology. But what truly infuriates the public isn't just the time. It's the sense that the speed of law enforcement and the speed of public perception are completely out of sync. When people see obvious red flags, they cannot understand why the legal process appears frozen. Second, who is truly responsible for a child? This is the most painful and the most sensitive question of all. For a 14-year-old child to die under suspicious circumstances, and for she to be abandoned inside a vehicle in such a condition, someone must be responsible. But where does that responsibility fall? A relationship alleged to involve an age gap. The adults surrounding Celeste. The child protection system that failed to intervene. Or the individuals who knew something was wrong but stayed silent. While the public has focused its attention on one person, the law requires us to examine the entire chain of events. The issue is not only who caused the death, but also who failed to prevent it. Third, behind the scenes, what is LAPD actually doing? Behind closed doors, LAP has not been as silent as they appear. Phones, servers, and digital devices have been seized. A Hollywood Hills rental home was searched. Witnesses have been interviewed. CME's forensic office has been instructed to prioritize the file. But this secrecy is exactly what fuels controversy. When media outlets report conflicting information, and when unnamed sources contradict each other, the public begins to question, is LAPD protecting someone? Or waiting for something? These 3 questions will shape this entire video, and may ultimately shape how the world remembers Celeste's case for years to come. Slow investigation or tactic. To most people following this case online, the 2-month delay feels impossible to justify. A 14-year-old child in a Tesla connected to an adult she was allegedly involved with. Celeste was in a state of severe decomposition. The vehicle had been abandoned. Electronic devices were seized. A Hollywood Hills home was searched. Witnesses were interviewed. From a public perspective, this looks like more than enough to declare someone a suspect within days, not months. But inside the American legal system, the process does not operate on what seems obvious. It operates on evidence thresholds. And to understand why LAP refused to use the word suspect until now, we must first understand the three escalating legal standards that determine how and when investigators can label someone reasonable suspicion, probable cause, and beyond a reasonable doubt. The first level, reasonable suspicion, is a very low threshold. Police only need specific, articulable reasons to believe a person might be connected to a crime. In this case, reasonable suspicion existed the moment Celeste was discovered in the Tesla. That suspicion justified seizing electronics, interviewing witnesses, and searching a residence. But reasonable suspicion is not enough for law enforcement to publicly identify someone as a suspect, especially when the cause and manner of death remain undetermined. If medical examiners cannot confirm that a crime occurred, police cannot escalate the case to the next legal stage. The second level is probable cause, a dramatically higher bar. Probable cause requires a fair probability, backed by concrete evidence, that the person committed a crime. This standard is essential before police can arrest someone, label them a suspect, or pursue certain warrants. This is exactly where the Celeste investigation stalled for 2 months. Without a clear determination of whether Celeste died from homicide, overdose, an accident, or another cause, police had no definable crime to tie a suspect to. When a remains is severely decomposed, toxicology, DNA, and forensic reconstruction take significantly longer. Until those results come in, the case remains medically ambiguous and legally frozen. The highest standard, beyond a reasonable doubt, is what prosecutors must meet to secure a conviction. Police do not need this level of certainty to label someone a suspect, but they do need to see a plausible pathway toward it. Publicly naming a suspect who later cannot be charged exposes the department to legal liability and accusations of misconduct. And in a case as sensitive as Celeste's, involving allegations of grooming, a minor victim, and a high-profile figure, the stakes are far too high for LAP to rush. So why did it take 2 months? Because law enforcement could not move from reasonable suspicion to probable cause until forensic results clarified what type of case they were dealing with. Only once toxicology, pathology, and digital evidence began to align could LAD legally, and safely, use the word the public has been waiting to hear: suspect. From the outside, the Celeste Rivas case looks straightforward. A child dies under suspicious circumstances. She is found in a car connected to an adult, and the public expects rapid answers. But inside the investigation, this is one of the most technically difficult cases LAPD and the medical examiner's office could face. 3 specific obstacles: advanced decomposition, no confirmed time of death, and no known location of death, have slowed every stage of the process. These are not minor hurdles. In forensic terms, they can alter the entire trajectory of a criminal investigation. The first and most critical challenge is advanced decomposition. By the time Celeste was discovered in the Tesla, the remains were described as severely decomposed, with some remains parts difficult to analyze. When decomposition reaches this stage, many of the key indicators normally used to determine cause of death simply disappear. Soft tissues break down, organs collapse, blood tox becomes harder to interpret. Injuries that might have been visible days earlier, bruising, ligature marks, blunt force trauma, may no longer be identifiable. In cases involving minors, this becomes even more complicated because juvenile physiology can deteriorate faster under certain conditions. All of this leaves the medical examiner with a devastatingly limited toolbox. Instead of answering how she died, they are often forced to conclude only what they cannot see. And that uncertainty ripples through every part of the investigation. The second major obstacle is the lack of a clear time of death. Time of death is one of the most important forensic anchors in any suspicious death. It helps establish the timeline, confirm or eliminate alibis, cross-check digital evidence, and narrow down suspects. But when a remains is severely decomposed, the usual methods for estimating time of death, remains temperature, rigor mortis, liver patterns, insect activity, become unreliable or unusable. The ME cannot definitively say whether Celeste died hours, days, or even weeks before the discovery. And without that anchor, LAP cannot construct a precise sequence of events. They cannot say who was present, who had access, or who may have interacted with her before or after she died. In a case already clouded by secrecy, this lack of temporal clarity is crippling. The third and perhaps most overlooked challenge is the unknown location of death. The Tesla where Celeste was found is not necessarily the place where she died. It may not even be the place where she was first placed. The decomposition level suggests she was deceased long before the tow yard workers opened the frunk. That means detectives are dealing with a potential secondary scene, or even multiple scenes. Without knowing where the death occurred, investigators are left searching for evidence in locations that may have long since been cleaned, altered, or compromised. A homicide scene could have been miles away, or inside a residence, or in a space now inaccessible. Every hour lost between death and discovery makes physical proof exponentially harder to obtain. Together, these three obstacles create a perfect storm: a decomposed body, no reliable timeline, no confirmed location, and layered over that is a case involving a minor, digital communications, and a high-profile figure under public scrutiny. These conditions make fast answers impossible, and they explain why investigators have moved far more cautiously than the public expected. To the general public, this is the question that makes the least sense. If a 14-year-old girl was allegedly in a relationship with an adult, why hasn't APID already made an arrest for exploitation, grooming, or unlawful conduct with a minor? In the eyes of millions, that allegation alone seems enough to put someone in handcuffs. But in reality, these crimes are among the most legally complicated to prosecute, especially when the victim is deceased and cannot provide direct testimony. The biggest reason is simple: police need digital evidence. Not rumors, not screenshots circulating online, not assumptions about a relationship, but verified, authenticated communications that clearly establish the nature of the interaction, the timeline, and the intent. In modern cases involving minors, text messages, DMs, voice notes, emails, photos, location data, and cloud backups are the backbone of a criminal charge. Without them, prosecutors have no admissible proof of grooming, no confirmation of sexual conversations, and no way to demonstrate coercion or exploitation. Even if people online have seen alleged messages, law enforcement cannot act on unverified material. They must obtain the data directly from devices or platforms, and that process takes time. Phones must be unlocked, sometimes through complex forensic methods. Cloud accounts require warrants. Social media platforms require subpoenas. And once the data is obtained, investigators must authenticate every message to ensure it hasn't been edited, forwarded, fabricated, or manipulated. In a high-profile case, any error could collapse the prosecution instantly. Then comes the second, and equally crucial, requirement: proving where the relationship took place. In the United States, age of consent laws vary dramatically between states. Some states set the age of consent at 18, some at 17, and a few have Romeo and Juliet exceptions, close-in age exemptions, or additional conditions. That means a relationship that is a felony in one jurisdiction might be a different crime, or legally ambiguous in another. For prosecutors, the location of the conduct determines the exact criminal charge, the severity of the penalty, whether the case qualifies as statutory rape, whether digital grooming laws apply, and whether sentencing enhancements are triggered. If the alleged relationship occurred across different cities, different counties, or even different states, LAPD must map out the precise geographical path. That includes determining where the pair met, where they communicated, where they traveled, and where any illegal acts might have taken place. Without clear geographical proof, prosecutors cannot decide which law applies, and filing the wrong charge could result in a dismissal before trial even begins. This complexity becomes even more severe when the victim is deceased. There is no testimony, no interview, no ability to clarify timelines or correct misunderstandings. Everything must be reconstructed from digital footprints alone. And if those digital footprints are incomplete or corrupted, prosecutors are left with a case built on inference instead of evidence. A case would be destroyed in minutes by a skilled defense attorney. So why hasn't LAPD made an arrest for crimes involving a minor? Because they must first secure an airtight digital record, authenticate every message, determine exactly where each act occurred, and match those findings to the correct statutory framework. Until then, no arrest can move forward, no matter what the public believes. To the public, this is one of the most puzzling questions. As media discussions and online conversations continue to explore the possibility of an inappropriate relationship between an adult and a teenager, many people wonder why law enforcement has not taken immediate action. But in real investigative practice, any allegation involving a minor requires an exceptionally high standard of proof, and, importantly, every detail must be verified, not assumed or based on circulating content. The first major reason for delay is the requirement for digital evidence. In modern cases, suspicions of an inappropriate relationship cannot be substantiated by rumors, unverified screenshots, or online speculation. Investigators must obtain data directly from devices or platforms: messages, communication logs, location information, stored images, emails, activity records, and more. All of this must be gathered through legal procedures, such as search warrants, subpoenas to service providers, or forensic extraction from locked devices. Once collected, the data must undergo a process of authentication to ensure it has not been edited, altered, or misunderstood during online circulation. This step is crucial, because even a single questionable piece of evidence can undermine an entire case in court. As a result, verifying digital footprints often takes significantly longer than the public expects. The second challenge is geography. In the United States, each state has its own laws governing age of consent, close-in age exceptions, and additional rules about online communication or potentially inappropriate conduct. If there are indications that two individuals interacted, traveled, or communicated across different locations, investigators must determine exactly what happened, where it happened, and which jurisdiction's law applies. For cases involving individuals under 18, identifying the wrong location can lead to incorrect charges or jurisdictional issues that completely halt a case. That is why investigators must carefully reconstruct timelines, cross-reference location data, and verify device logs before reaching any conclusion. These difficulties become even more significant when the affected individual cannot provide testimony. Without direct statements, clarifications, or the ability to confirm details, investigators must rely entirely on objective digital data, forensic analysis, and cross-referenced evidence. Everything must be pieced together from records rather than words, a process that is inherently slow and complex. For all of these reasons, decisions regarding any allegation involving a minor require a high level of evidence, multi-layer verification, and precise understanding of legal jurisdiction. This is why progress in such cases often takes much longer than what the public anticipates. When the public looks at the Celeste Rivas case, the most repeated frustration is simple: why does LAP seem so slow? Why do they say nothing? Why does it feel like they are ignoring the obvious? Online communities often respond with sarcasm, joking that officials must be blunt, lillis, for not acting sooner. But within certain circles of legal analysts, former detectives, and behavioral experts, a very different theory has emerged: the idea that law enforcement may be intentionally appearing passive in order to observe, collect, and wait for mistakes. This theory is sometimes summarized in one provocative sentence: they want him to think he's safe. Again, this is not a statement of fact, nor does it imply wrongdoing by any individual. Instead, it reflects a strategy that experts in cases where public pressure is intense but evidence is incomplete. To understand why some analysts believe this strategy might be in play, we need to look at how police behave in cases where the suspect is aware of the investigation. According to several retired homicide investigators, when someone knows they are being watched, they often become extremely careful, deleting messages, changing routines, avoiding communication, or protecting devices. But when they believe the case is going nowhere, their guard drops. They may return to normal habits, contact people from the past, access old accounts, or speak more freely. In other words, the illusion of safety can be a powerful investigative tool. Former detectives often describe it this way: when they think the heat is off, they talk. This does not mean LAPD is targeting any specific person. Instead, it describes a general principle used when dealing with any case that relies heavily on digital reconstruction, timelines, and relationships. Letting the investigation appear quiet may encourage individuals close to the case, whoever they may be, to revisit conversations or interact online in ways that digital forensics can later capture. Another important reason experts raise this possibility is the absence of clear communication from LAPD. For 2 months, the department of labeling anyone as a suspect, avoided press conferences, and avoided giving the public a sense of progress. While this silence frustrated many, some analysts argue that silence itself can be a tactic. When police openly declare, "We have strong evidence," it can tip off individuals who become more cautious. But when police publicly say very little, or appear indecisive, it can lull people into assuming they are no longer at risk. Retired prosecutors add another layer to this theory: the element of timing. If investigators expect digital evidence to take weeks or months to extract and authenticate, they may prefer to keep the public and potential subjects in a state of uncertainty. In this scenario, naming a suspect too early risks derailing the process. Keeping everything quiet, even appearing slow or disorganized, buys time. It is also worth noting that LAPD may be coordinating with other agencies, including the medical examiner's office, the DA, or federal partners, which can create long periods where outward progress is not visible. During these gaps, investigators may be analyzing patterns in communication, mapping locations, reviewing metadata, or reconstructing timelines, all without announcing a single detail to the public. But this possibility also highlights a deeper truth about public perceptions. When people see a case involving a child, they expect immediate action. The idea that police might intentionally hold back information is emotionally difficult for many. It feels counterintuitive, almost irresponsible, even if, from a strategic standpoint, it may be effective. In the end, whether LAPD is playing dumb intentionally remains unknown. What experts agree on is that silence in an active investigation does not automatically mean inaction. In some cases, it is the quietest investigations that are gathering the loudest evidence. Dismembered or decomposition. California's warm, dry climate, especially in the southern regions, significantly influences the natural decomposition process. While this topic can be difficult to visualize, forensic science provides clear, well-documented explanations for how environmental conditions may contribute to changes in the human after death. In hot and low humidity environments, decomposition follows a pattern that differs from cooler or more humid climates. High temperatures speed up moisture loss in soft tissues. As water evaporates, the skin muscles and connective tissues begin to shrink, dry out, and eventually stiffen. Forensic experts often describe this stage as mummification, like drying, where the remains undergoes desiccation rather than the typical moist decomposition seen in temperate climates. As soft tissues lose elasticity, the structures that connect bones, such as ligaments, tendons, and joint capsules, also dry and weaken. These tissues normally hold the skeletal system firmly together. When they dehydrate, they can become brittle and may no longer support the bones in their usual positions. This is one of the ways natural bone separation can occur, even without any external force. Heat can also accelerate early biological activity, such as insect involvement, which contributes to the breakdown of soft tissues. When soft tissues diminish more quickly, bones become exposed to environmental conditions sooner and undergo further drying. If Celeste is located in a confined, poorly ventilated, or heat-retaining space, such as an enclosed compartment, decomposition may rapidly than it would outdoors. These factors illustrate that in a warm and dry climate like California's, significant tissue loss, drying, and bone separation can be natural outcomes of environmental conditions. Understanding these processes is essential for communities seeking accurate, science-based insight into forensic findings and the biological changes that occur over time. In the early stages of reporting, media outlets often work with incomplete information. When details come from unnamed sources, rapid updates, or early observations at a scene, misunderstandings can easily occur. In cases involving advanced decomposition, these misunderstandings are even more likely because the physical changes that happen to the remains can look unfamiliar, even to people who have seen forensic cases before. This scientific reality may help explain why some news reports initially used phrases that caused public confusion. One of the most common reasons for misinterpretation is the loss of soft tissue. In hot, dry climates like California's, moisture leaves Celeste rapidly, and soft tissues break down much faster than the skeleton. As muscles shrink and connective tissues dry, areas that normally hold bones in place begin to weaken. When this happens, bones can appear separated or not attached, even though the process occurred naturally. For non-experts observing such a scene, the absence of soft tissue may visually resemble something unnatural. The joints may appear parted, and bones may not be in their usual alignment. Without scientific context, these natural outcomes can be mistaken for deliberate actions. Early reporters, hearing secondhand descriptions, may have interpreted these appearances in ways that sounded more dramatic than accurate. Another source of confusion is the use of containment materials, such as bags, towels, or coverings sometimes found at recovery scenes. These items are not unusual in forensic contexts. They may be used by the individuals who discover a body, first responders, or transport personnel for safety, sanitation, or preservation. However, when the public hears that parts were in a bag, the imagination tends to jump to the most alarming interpretation. In reality, containment can happen for completely ordinary reasons. For example, a bag may be used to prevent further environmental exposure, to organize personal items found nearby, or simply because recovery workers needed a way to handle fragile remains respectfully. Without that nuance, the detail can unintentionally fuel misconceptions. What is routine in a forensic setting may sound unusual, or even sensational, when removed from context. Media outlets are often under pressure to publish quickly. During breaking news events, it's common for early information to be updated, corrected, or clarified as investigators complete their work. When initial descriptions come from witnesses, tow yard workers, or individuals unfamiliar with forensic science, the terminology used may not reflect scientific accuracy. Reporters trying to translate those descriptions for a general audience can unintentionally amplify misunderstandings. It is also important to remember that journalists rarely have access to full forensic reports in the early stages of an investigation. Without that scientific foundation, they may rely on impressions, unofficial comments, or details that lack context. Once the medical examiner releases formal findings, the narrative often changes, not because anyone intentionally misled the public, but because science replaces speculation. By understanding how decomposition works and how easily visual appearances can be misinterpreted, communities can better recognize why early reporting sometimes sounds contradictory or inaccurate. Education, clarity, and patience help the public engage with sensitive cases more thoughtfully and reduce the spread of misunderstandings rooted in incomplete information. When investigators approach a case involving unclear circumstances of death, one of the most important steps is determining which forensic scenario applies. Different physical findings naturally lead to different legal interpretations, not because one outcome is better or worse, but because the law must classify each situation accurately before moving forward. Understanding this helps the public see why agencies may draw very different conclusions depending on what medical examiners ultimately determine. One scenario that draws immediate public attention is the possibility of intentional dismemberment. In forensic science, this is a highly specific finding that requires clear, identifiable evidence from the medical examiner, such as tool marks, patterns consistent with deliberate separation, or indications of purposeful modification of remains. If such evidence is confirmed, it often narrows the investigative focus. In many jurisdictions, intentional dismemberment is legally associated with an attempt to conceal identity or obscure the circumstances of death. Because of this connection, the law typically treats confirmed dismemberment as a strong indicator that the death may be classified as a criminal act, and investigators then prioritize examining human involvement. However, it is just as important to understand that this conclusion can only be reached through verified forensic analysis. Visual appearance alone, especially in cases involving advanced decomposition, does not determine whether dismemberment occurred. Clear and objective confirmation from specialists is essential before any legal interpretation can be made. In contrast, if the medical examiner determines that the physical condition of the remains is fully consistent with natural decomposition, a much wider range of possible explanations becomes legally viable. Environmental conditions, temperature, humidity, insect activity, and time all play major roles in how a remains changes after death. In such cases, the law must consider multiple possibilities, including medical, accidental, environmental, or other non-criminal factors. One of the scenarios that becomes legally open in a decomposition-based finding is the possibility of a medical event, such as an underlying health condition or reaction. Another is the possibility of an accidental situation, where no deliberate action by another person is indicated by the evidence. In some circumstances, toxicology results may expand the investigative scope even further by clarifying whether substances played any role, without automatically implying intent or wrongdoing. When decomposition is the primary explanation for physical appearance, investigators also examine contextual elements such as timeline, last known communications, environmental exposure, and any potential indicators of self-directed or unintentional harm. Each path requires careful review and does not, on its own, point to a single conclusion. This broader investigative frame is why cases involving advanced decomposition often take longer. The legal system must rule out many possibilities before narrowing the focus. Regardless of scenario, the key takeaway is that each forensic conclusion shapes the legal process differently. Confirmed dismemberment directs investigators toward a more targeted, criminal-focused analysis. Confirmed decomposition opens multiple, legally neutral hypotheses that require extensive scientific evaluation before any determination can be made. By understanding how these frameworks operate, communities can better appreciate why investigative outcomes depend so heavily on forensic clarity, and why patience is often necessary as experts work to identify the most accurate and responsible interpretation of the evidence. Toxicology is one of the most important components of any forensic investigation, especially when the cause of death is unclear. Yet it is also one of the slowest. Many people wonder why results cannot be processed in a matter of days, especially when a case is high-profile or emotionally sensitive. The answer lies in the complexity of the science itself and the unique challenges presented by the condition of the remains. The first reason toxicology takes time is that laboratories must test hundreds of potential compounds, not just a few. Modern toxicology panels often include a wide range of substances, medications, over-the-counter products, prescription drugs, environmental chemicals, alcohols, plant-based compounds, and hundreds of synthetic substances. Forensic labs cannot make assumptions about what may or may not be present. Instead, they must run screening tests that cast a very wide net. Each of these screens has its own preparation process, time frame, and cross-checking requirements. Once a substance shows up in a preliminary screening, confirmatory tests must be run using more precise instruments, such as gas chromatography, mass spectrometry (GCMS), or liquid chromatography, tandem mass spectrometry (ALC-MS-GMS). These confirmatory tests are essential in forensic settings because legal conclusions must be based on accurate, repeatable, scientifically validated results. A second challenge arises when Celeste has undergone significant dehydration due to environmental conditions. In warm and dry climates like California's, moisture can leave the tissues quickly, altering the concentration of substances in the body. when dehydration occurs, chemicals in the bloodstream or organs may become more concentrated, diffuse differently, or appear in atypical locations within the body. This means that toxicologists must spend additional time interpreting the results carefully. Instead of simply reading the numbers, they must determine whether a detected level reflects the actual amount present at the time of death, or whether it has shifted due to post-mortem changes. These interpretive steps require specialized expertise and cannot be rushed, because misunderstanding a concentration can lead to incorrect conclusions about what happened biologically. Another factor slowing the process is that forensic toxicology labs routinely handle a large number of cases. Even in high-profile investigations, every sample must follow the same chain of custody procedures, documentation standards, and quality controls that apply to all cases. These safeguards exist to ensure fairness and accuracy, and they help prevent errors that could compromise the scientific integrity of the findings. Additionally, when decomposition is advanced, standard sample sites may not be available. Toxicologists may need to extract fluids from alternative locations or use preserved tissues that require additional preparation. These samples often need more time for purification and analysis, adding another layer to the timeline. Taken together, these factors explain why toxicology results can take many weeks, and sometimes longer even when the public is eager for answers. The goal of toxicology is not speed but precision. Each test must be methodical, validated, and interpreted with scientific care. Understanding these processes helps communities see that long timelines are not a sign of delay or inaction. Instead, they reflect the commitment to delivering results that are accurate, reliable, and respectful of both scientific standards and the individuals affected by the investigation. Communication error. In fast-moving investigations, especially those involving minors or high-profile public figures, media narratives can shift dramatically. But few changes are as striking as what happened with TMZ's reporting. Within just 24 hours, the outlet published two headlines that appeared to contradict each other, one stating that no arrest was imminent, and another suggesting that a particular individual may now be viewed as a suspect. For the public, this sudden reversal created whiplash. Audiences often interpret media shifts as evidence of hidden developments, secret breakthroughs, or internal disagreements within law enforcement. When these headlines circulate across social platforms, they can shape public sentiment instantly. One headline can calm speculation, the next can reignite it. This volatility has real consequences. Many people rely on major outlets to understand what is happening, especially when official agencies are silent. So when a large platform publishes two conflicting interpretations within one day, the public begins to question which version, if any, reflects reality. Some may feel reassured, others misled, and many become even more confused about the state of the investigation. Part of this confusion stems from a common phrase in modern reporting: sources inside LAPD, or anonymous law enforcement officials. While these sources can sometimes offer insight, they also pose significant for accuracy and for public trust. The first risk is context. Anonymous sources may share partial information, early impressions, or interpretations rather than confirmed facts, without a complete understanding of what investigators know, what stage the case is in, or how evidence is being processed. Even well-meaning insiders can unintentionally provide an incomplete picture. When reporters frame these fragments as significant updates, the public may mistake uncertainty for certainty. The second danger is miscommunication. Police departments are large. Detectives, analysts, forensic teams, and administrative staff do not always share the same information at the same time. One individual may believe a case is nowhere near an arrest, while another may be aware that certain evidence is being reviewed. Anonymous quotes can reflect these internal differences without representing the department as a whole. A third challenge is lack of accountability. Because the source is unnamed, the public cannot know whether the person providing the information has direct involvement in the case, indirect knowledge, or simply personal interpretation. Without transparency, it is impossible to verify whether the source's statements are grounded in official documentation or informal conversations. Finally, anonymous sourcing can unintentionally distort public expectations. If one headline suggests major progress and another implies the opposite, community discussions become polarized. People may form strong opinions long before official facts are released, leading to speculation, emotional reactions, and premature conclusions. For all these reasons, experts urge caution when interpreting media reports based on unnamed law enforcement sources. Investigations evolve, evidence takes time to process, and early impressions can change. Understanding these dynamics helps the public remain patient, grounded, and informed, even when headlines shift rapidly. In fast-moving, emotionally charged cases, viewers often expect every new video or live stream to bring major developments. When Law and Crime released a 20-minute segment explaining that investigators had not announced new information, some viewers reacted with humor or frustration. Comments like, 20 minutes, just to say there's no update, reflect an understandable desire for clarity during uncertain times. But from an educational perspective, the purpose of legal commentary is often different from what audiences expect. Legal analysts focus not only on breaking news, but also on interpreting silence, explaining procedures, and clarifying what no update actually means within the justice system. In many cases, no news can reveal just as much as a major announcement, if not more, about where an investigation stands. For example, when a department does not label anyone a suspect, analysts can explain why certain legal thresholds have not been met. When toxicology results have not been released, they can provide context about laboratory timelines. When police do not hold press conferences, commentators can help audiences understand how agencies typically communicate during sensitive investigations. These explanations may not feel dramatic, but they offer important educational value, helping viewers interpret investigative silence in a responsible way, rather than relying on speculation circulating online. Another reason no updates exist is that communication itself affects public expectation. When analysts make space for verified information, even if limited, they reinforce the idea that careful reporting is more important than speed. This helps reduce misinformation, protects the integrity of the investigation, and supports a more thoughtful conversation among viewers. Ultimately, what some audiences perceive as filler may actually be an effort to guide the public through the slow, methodical pace of the legal system. By understanding the role of these explanations, communities can better appreciate why responsible reporting sometimes requires patience, and why nothing new yet can still be meaningful. In high-profile cases, the media can gather, publish, and amplify information far faster than official agencies can verify it. News outlets can update stories within minutes, while platforms like X, YouTube, and TikTok circulate speculation instantly. This speed creates a natural gap between public expectation and legal procedure, a gap that can shape how communities interpret the progress of an investigation. When media coverage moves faster than the legal system, one of the immediate effects is a heightened sense of urgency among viewers. People may assume that every new headline reflects a major shift, even when the information is preliminary or unconfirmed. As stories spread rapidly, the public begins to expect immediate answers, believing that if the media can move quickly, official agencies should be able to do the same. However, law enforcement and forensic departments operate under a completely different framework. LAPD must follow strict evidence protocols, chain of custody requirements, and legal thresholds. The medical examiner must rely on scientific validation, not impressions or early descriptions. These processes are intentionally slow because accuracy is more important than speed. When media reports outpace these procedures, it can unintentionally create pressure on both agencies. For LAPD, this pressure often appears as calls for quicker statements, earlier designations of suspects, or faster release of investigative details. Yet premature disclosures could disrupt interviews, affect digital forensics, or unintentionally influence witness behavior. From an educational standpoint, it is essential to recognize that silence from law enforcement does not mean inactivity. It often means they are working carefully behind the scenes. For the medical examiner, fast-moving media coverage can generate assumptions about cause or manner of death before scientific analysis is complete. This may lead to public misunderstandings when early online discussions do not match final official results. Recognizing these dynamics helps communities stay informed with patience and clarity. When science and law move slowly, it is usually because they aim to be thorough, fair, and responsible, even when headlines are moving at the speed of social media. Possibility. In many high-profile cases, the public often gravitates toward the most structured or intentional explanation, including the possibility of a planned act, even when no official conclusions have been reached. Understanding why communities form this belief is important, not because it proves any scenario true, but because it highlights how people process uncertainty, timelines, and incomplete information. One reason the public leans toward the idea of planning is the sequence of events as they understand it. When information is released slowly or in fragments, individuals often connect the pieces in ways that appear purposeful. For example, if a vehicle is found in a certain location, if electronic devices are collected, or if timelines feel unclear, these gaps can naturally lead observers to imagine deliberate coordination rather than coincidence. This is a common psychological process in moments of uncertainty. The mind seeks patterns. A second factor is the emotional impact of cases involving young individuals. When a situation feels deeply sensitive, the public may assume that significant intention must have been involved. This tendency often comes from a place of concern and empathy, rather than from evidence. people want clarity, and intentional explanations can feel more decisive than accidental or medical ones. Media coverage also plays a role. When headlines mention search warrants, digital forensics, or investigative delays, the public may interpret these tools as indicators of planning, even though such tools are standard in many cases. Without full context, ordinary procedures can seem extraordinary. Finally, the community may toward intentional explanations because official silence leaves room for interpretation. When investigators have not yet released conclusions, people fill the informational gap with theories that feel coherent. This is a natural response to uncertainty, not a reflection of what actually happened. By recognizing these psychological and social patterns, communities can better understand how perceptions form and why patience is essential. Investigations evolve through evidence, not assumption, and the legal process must remain grounded in verified findings rather than early interpretations. In many investigations involving unclear circumstances of death, the public and analysts often consider the possibility of a medical or accident event followed by an attempt to conceal the situation. Understanding why this scenario arises, and why others question it, can help communities engage with the case more thoughtfully and responsibly. Those who find the overdose with concealment scenario plausible often cite timing and uncertainty. When the cause of death has not been confirmed and toxicology results are pending, some observers naturally wonder whether a medical or accidental event might have occurred. They may also consider the role of fear, confusion, or panic that can affect people who suddenly encounter a medical emergency. Supporters of this hypothesis tend to emphasize that concealment, in a broad sense, does not always imply harmful intent. Sometimes it reflects disorientation or poor decision-making in a moment of crisis. This interpretation generally focuses on human psychology rather than wrongdoing. On the other hand, those who question this scenario raise equally valid points. Skeptics often note that many accidental or medical events are typically followed by calls for assistance. From a public education perspective, people emphasize that seeking help is the safest and most responsible response to any emergency. They also point out that concealment, if it occurred, can complicate investigations, delaying clarity and increasing confusion within the community. For this reason, some argue that this scenario requires careful evidence before it can be considered credible. Both perspectives share an important common ground. They highlight the uncertainty that naturally exists before official findings are released. Without confirmed toxicology, verified timelines, or fully analyzed digital records, the public is left interpreting incomplete information. By examining both sides of the argument, communities can foster more balanced discussions. This helps reduce speculation, encourages patience, and reinforces the importance of relying on confirmed forensic results rather than early assumptions. In highly sensitive cases, certain interpretations gain traction not because they are proven, but because they resonate with the images, language, or early descriptions that circulate online. One scenario some community members discuss is the idea of actual dismemberment. It is important to clarify from the outset that no official agency has confirmed such a finding, and forensic specialists emphasize that only the medical examiner can determine whether separation of remains is natural, environmental, or intentional. Still, examining why some people believe this scenario can help communities understand how perceptions form, and why careful verification is essential. Many individuals who lean toward this belief point to early descriptions that were ambiguous. When initial reports mention phrases like, remains parts, severe decomposition, or found in containment, members of the public may visualize something more dramatic than what forensic science actually describes. Without context, such wording can sound similar to cases where dismemberment was confirmed in the past, leading people to subconsciously associate the two situations even if the underlying facts differ. Another reason is that visual imagery is powerful. When decomposition leads to natural separation of tissues or bones, a common occurrence in warm, dry climates, those unfamiliar with forensic processes may interpret the appearance as intentional. This is not a reflection of wrongdoing but rather of how unfamiliar many people are with the biological changes that occur after death. When people encounter descriptions that feel unusual, they may assume an unusual cause. Additionally, some individuals draw on patterns from other cases they have followed. In true crime communities, people often compare current cases with past examples, using them as reference points. Although comparison can help people process information, it can also lead to overestimating the likelihood of extreme scenarios. When a previous case involved intentional dismemberment, the public may see parallels even when scientific evidence has not supported such a connection. Despite these perceptions, there are strong educational reasons to emphasize that evidence for intentional dismemberment has not been established. Forensic science relies on specific indicators, such as tool marks, patterned injuries, and micro-level tissue characteristics, that cannot be confirmed through photographs, second-hand descriptions, or speculation. Only the medical examiner's report can determine whether bone or tissue changes are the result of natural decomposition, environmental conditions, insect activity, transport, or other non-intentional factors. Moreover, decomposition can sometimes mimic features that, to the untrained eye, resemble separation caused by deliberate action. Loss of soft tissue, drying, joint loosening, and environmental exposure can all lead to bone displacement or disarticulation. These changes are well documented in forensic literature and occur without any human involvement. Recognizing this helps reduce confusion and highlights why experts caution against early interpretations. Another important point is that using contained materials, such as bags or coverings, may be part of normal recovery or transport procedures. These items can easily be misunderstood by the public, leading to assumptions that differ significantly from their actual, routine purpose. Ultimately, understanding both why people believe certain interpretations and why official verification is necessary encourages more thoughtful public discussion. It reminds communities that early impressions are not the same as scientific findings, and that responsible analysis requires patience and reliance on confirmed, carefully examined evidence. In many high-profile investigations, the community often begins examining not only central figures, but also the possibility that more than one person may have been involved in certain actions surrounding the case. This does not mean that additional involvement is proven or even likely. Instead, it reflects how people attempt to understand gaps in the timeline, inconsistent details, and unexplained behaviors. Two questions frequently raised by the public are, who drove the car? And, who sent messages from Celeste's phone? Understanding why these questions arise helps clarify how perception develops, and why official investigation must rely on concrete verification rather than public interpretation. The first question, who drove the car, emerges because the vehicle plays a central role in the narrative. When a car is moved, parked, or later discovered in a new location, viewers naturally wonder who was responsible for its movement and when that movement occurred. Cars are important in forensic timelines, but they generate digital and physical data, GPS logs, license plate reader hits, surveillance footage, toll records, and internal diagnostic information. These data points can help determine whether the vehicle was driven recently, whether multiple people used it, or whether it was stationary for an extended period. However, from an educational standpoint, it is important to highlight that public speculation about who drove the vehicle is not evidence. Investigators must rely on objective data rather than assumptions. A vehicle's movement may be explained by routine use, towing, shared access, authorized drivers, or other normal circumstances. Without verified logs, conclusions about who drove the car and when remain uncertain. The second question, who used Celeste's phone, arises because digital communication is central to modern investigations. When messages appear to be sent after a person's last known activity, some observers naturally wonder who typed them. But phones today can transmit notifications, app activity, cloud syncing, scheduled messages, or system-generated logs without anyone physically touching the device. In addition, many people share devices within families or social groups, making assumptions even more difficult. From a forensic perspective, determining who used a phone requires detailed digital analysis. Investigators may examine IP addresses, typing patterns, login behavior, geolocation data, and timestamp integrity. Before drawing any conclusions, analysts must also consider possibilities like cached messages, delayed sending, background processes, or routine device sensing. These technical factors can easily create activity that appears unusual, but is entirely ordinary. The reason the public raises these questions often reflects a desire for clarity rather than suspicion. When timelines feel incomplete, people try to fill the gaps. When communication patterns seem inconsistent, they look for explanations. These responses are rooted in human nature. In uncertain situations, the mind seeks linear narratives. However, responsible public discussion requires remembering that questions are not conclusions. An inquiry about who drove a car does not imply wrongdoing. A question about phone usage does not indicate a harmful act. They are simply points of curiosity that underscore the need for verified forensic data. By understanding why these ideas circulate, communities can participate in conversations that are thoughtful, patient, and grounded in respect for due process. Accurate answers come from evidence, not assumption, and full clarity can only be reached when official findings are released. In discussions surrounding complex investigations, some members of the public occasionally raise the possibility of a frame-up, the idea that evidence was planted or manipulated to implicate someone. While it is natural for people to explore every potential scenario, it is equally important to understand why, from an investigative and scientific standpoint, frame-ups are typically considered less plausible without strong supporting evidence. One major reason is that a frame-up requires a high level of coordination, often involving multiple steps. access to property, movement of objects, knowledge of timelines, an understanding of forensic procedures, and the ability to anticipate future investigative steps. These actions would require planning opportunity and a precise understanding of how law enforcement processes digital and physical evidence. Because of this complexity, investigators treat intentional evidence placement as rare unless there are clear indicators suggesting otherwise. A second factor is that modern forensic systems include extensive safeguards. Vehicles, devices, and locations often record digital traces automatically: GPS logs, system timestamps, wireless connections, biometric locks, and metadata. Cellular networks and cloud platforms also generate independent records. To create a convincing frame-up, someone would need to manipulate multiple sources of data across different systems, many of which cannot be altered without leaving digital footprints. As a result, the likelihood of constructing a seamless, undetectable frame-up is low. Additionally, investigations today involve multiple agencies and specialists. From digital forensics to pathology to crime scene analysis, each department independently reviews evidence. These parallel checks reduce the chance that manipulated information would go unnoticed. If inconsistencies did exist, they would typically flag early through cross-comparison. Finally, for a frame-up to be credible, there must be clear motive, opportunity, and supporting evidence, elements that agencies evaluate carefully. Without these components, the theory remains speculative rather than grounded. Understanding these principles helps communities see why investigators generally view frame-up scenarios as unlikely unless strong, verifiable evidence points in that direction. In complex investigations, the public often gravitates toward the most visible individuals or the most emotionally charged explanations. As a result, one scenario that receives far less attention, yet is still evaluated in professional investigative work, is the possibility of a third-party dump, meaning that someone unrelated to the primary narrative may have placed a body or object in a location without the property owner's knowledge. Understanding this scenario does not imply that it is likely. Rather, it highlights how investigators must consider all logical possibilities before drawing conclusions. One reason this scenario is overlooked is that people tend to connect the discovery location directly to responsibility. When a body or object is found in a vehicle, room, or property, the public often assumes the individual connected to that location must automatically be involved. While this is understandable, investigative practice requires a broader lens. Vehicles can be accessed, borrowed, shared, or left unlocked. Locations can be entered by others. In dense urban areas, even brief opportunities can allow unauthorized access. This is why investigators always examine chain of custody, access points, and digital entry records before assigning significance to the discovery site. Another reason the third-party dump scenario receives little attention is that it lacks the dramatic cohesion of other theories. It does not offer clear emotional narrative, no confrontation, no planning, no intentional concealment. Instead, it presents a logistical possibility that may seem too mundane for public imagination. Yet from an educational standpoint, it is important to recognize that investigations often include ordinary explanations alongside extraordinary ones. Forensic and digital evidence play a crucial role in evaluating this scenario. GPS logs, timestamps, surveillance footage, and access records can help determine whether multiple individuals had contact with the vehicle or location. Only after these data points are analyzed can investigators responsibly narrow down the list of possibilities. By acknowledging this scenario, even if it ultimately proves unlikely, communities gain a clearer understanding of how thorough, methodical investigations are conducted. Considering all possibilities is a sign of responsible inquiry, not speculation. Wave of anger. One of the most striking dynamics in the public conversation surrounding this case is the sheer consistency of the comments. More than 200 people echoed nearly identical phrases, expressions of disbelief that the situation had not progressed faster, or that law enforcement had not made a more definitive statement earlier. Comments such as, "A blind man could have seen this coming," "Ray Charles saw this," and "How long does it take?" reflect a collective frustration that is less about the facts of the case and more about the emotional experience of waiting for clarity. These comments illustrate a familiar psychological response. When people feel they are observing a pattern, they assume the pattern must be obvious to everyone. In high-profile investigations, the public often relies on fragmented information, headlines, online discussions, early reports, and then forms a narrative that feels cohesive. Once that narrative solidifies, any delay from official agencies can be interpreted as avoidance, hesitation, or inefficiency, even when the delay is due to routine forensic processes. Another reason these reactions become so widespread is social contagion. When a few comments express impatience or certainty, others quickly adopt the same tone. Not because they possess additional knowledge, but because shared frustration feels validating. Over time, The repeated phrases become a kind of shorthand, a way for the community to express both urgency and solidarity. The phrasing also reveals how strongly people respond to cases involving young individuals. When emotions run high, the public gravitates toward explanations that feel immediate and intuitive. If they believe something appears obvious, they may assume investigative agencies must also see it, without recognizing that law enforcement operates under legal thresholds, scientific procedures, and evidentiary standards that are invisible to the public. It is also important to acknowledge that online environments amplify intensity. Algorithms elevate comments with strong emotion, sarcasm, or humor. As a result, statements like, "Ray Charles saw this," rise to the top, making them appear even more representative of public opinion than they may actually be. The louder comments become the visible majority. By examining these reactions through an educational lens, we can see that they do not necessarily reflect the facts of the case. They reflect the emotional landscape of a community waiting for answers. Understanding this helps separate public sentiment from official investigative progress and encourages viewers to stay patient, informed, and aware of the difference between perception and evidence. As the case gained national attention, a wave of sarcastic, almost comedic frustration swept through the online community. Comments like, "Water is wet," "Fork found in kitchen," and other exaggerated expressions became viral not because they added new information, but because they captured a collective sense of exasperation. These phrases are internet shorthand for, "This was obvious. Why is it taking so long to acknowledge it?" Sarcasm functions as a coping mechanism in moments where people feel powerless or uninformed. When official updates are limited, humor becomes a pressure valve. Mockery spreads quickly because it is simple, relatable, and emotionally direct. It allows the community to bond through shared impatience without needing detailed knowledge of the case. Another reason these comments gain traction is the nature of social media algorithms. Platforms tend to boost content that generates emotional reactions, whether laughter, shock, or irritation. A sharp one-liner like, "Fork found in kitchen," is instantly understandable, easily shareable, and serves as a symbolic critique of slow-moving information. These viral jokes are less about the case itself and more about how people process uncertainty. They reveal frustration, yes, but also a desire for clarity and closure, emotions that are natural when answers take time. One of the most vocal themes in community discussions is the rejection of the phrase "in lady" when referring to Celeste. Across hundreds of comments, viewers repeatedly emphasize a single point: Celeste was a child. For them, this is not just a factual correction, it is a moral and psychological boundary that must be protected. Language matters deeply in sensitive cases. The way people describe a person does more than convey age, it frames responsibility, vulnerability, and the power dynamic involved. When the community insists on using terms like child, kid, or 14-year-old, they are asserting the legal and developmental reality of who Celeste was. To many, the phrase, "young lady," feels like an adult label placed on someone who was not an adult, and that misalignment carries significant emotional weight. From an educational perspective, this reaction reflects a widely studied phenomenon in criminology and psychology. Language can influence how the public interprets wrongdoing, agency, and accountability. When minors are described using adult-coded language, observers may subconsciously attribute adult-level decision-making, independence, or maturity to them. This can unintentionally shift focus away from their vulnerability and the protections owed to them by society. The community's response is, in many ways, a corrective force. By firmly rejecting adult labels, audiences are reinforcing the importance of safeguarding children in public discourse. They are signaling that minors should not be linguistically elevated into adulthood, especially in contexts involving sensitive or potentially harmful circumstances. Another reason the public reacts strongly is the emotional framing. Words like "young lady" carry cultural associations of poise, autonomy, or romantic maturity, terms that people feel are incompatible with a person who was still legally and developmentally a child. Using child-appropriate language helps preserve the clarity of that distinction. This sensitivity to wording also reveals the community's desire to maintain ethical clarity. In cases involving minors, terminology can influence public empathy, legal perception, and expectations of responsibility. Calling Celeste keeps the focus on her protection, her innocence, and the societal duty owed to individuals her age. Ultimately, the discussion surrounding language is not about assigning blame, it is about respecting developmental truth. When the public insists on calling Celeste a child, they are affirming her identity, her vulnerability, and her right to be understood within the correct legal and emotional framework. As the case stands today, the investigation is still unfolding. Many of the most critical answers remain in the hands of forensic specialists, digital analysts, and investigators working quietly behind the scenes. While the public conversation has moved rapidly, the legal process moves at its own pace, careful, methodical, and built on evidence rather than impressions. Understanding what comes next helps frame both the uncertainty and the hope that the community continues to hold. One of the most significant pieces still awaited is the toxicology report. Toxicology is slow by nature. Laboratories must screen for hundreds of substances, verify each result, and interpret those findings within the context of environmental conditions and decomposition. Until these results arrive, key questions about biological factors, medical possibilities, or accidental scenarios remain open. Equally important is digital forensic analysis. Phones, apps, cloud data, GPS logs, account activity, and message timelines all require extensive examination. These processes can take weeks or months, but they often determine the sequence of events with far greater precision than human recollection. Additionally, analysts may review data from Tesla's onboard cameras and sensors. Modern vehicles record far more information than most people realize, including motion events, door openings, geolocation data, and sometimes limited visual footage depending on the model and settings. If retrievable, these records could clarify movements or timelines that are still uncertain. Finally, investigators will continue to examine questions surrounding who last drove the vehicle, who had access, and when any movements occurred. Vehicle logs, surveillance footage, and entry records all contribute to these answers. Together, these pending steps form the backbone of the next phase of the investigation. Amid the debates, emotions, and speculation, the community shares three consistent hopes. The first is justice for Celeste, an earnest desire for clarity, fairness, and a full understanding of what happened to a vulnerable 14-year-old girl. This desire is not driven by blame but by compassion. People want to ensure that her life is honored and her story treated with dignity. The second is transparency. Viewers want clear communication from officials, not because they expect immediate answers, but because openness helps reduce confusion, fear, and misinformation. In high-profile cases, transparency builds trust. The third hope is for proper recognition of minors in public discourse. Many commenters emphasize the importance of referring to Celeste accurately as a child. They want society to protect young people, in language, in law, and in narrative, so that no child is mischaracterized or misunderstood in moments that shape public perception. At its heart, this case is the story of a vulnerable child whose life ended far too soon. Regardless of the final forensic conclusions, the emotional truth remains the same. Celeste was a young girl navigating a complex world, and her story has touched millions. It is also a case that has divided public opinion, not because people disagree about her value, but because they are grappling with uncertainty, with gaps in information, and with the natural human need to make sense of a painful event. And finally, it is a case that has challenged public trust in systems, raising questions about how investigations work, how media shapes narratives, and how society protects its youngest members. As we wait for answers, one principle must guide every discussion.